I think we can finally be honest about something that's been bugging me since season 1. The 7 deadly sins in this show don't make sense. And I don't mean the show ignores them. I mean they're doing all the work of holding the world together and none of the work of actually telling the story. The sins decide where characters live. They don't drive who characters are. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I love this show. I need you to know that before we go any further. The music is incredible. The character designs are gorgeous. Poison alone is worth the entire series. This isn't a takedown, but there are 5 distinct ways this framework falls apart, and they escalate. By the end, there's one that genuinely broke my brain. So like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The 7 deadly sins: pride, lust, wrath, greed, gluttony, envy, sloth. Each one has a prince of hell who embodies it. These pairings come from Peter Binsfeld's 1589 classification, early modern Catholic demonology, not the Bible directly. Busy Pop didn't have to use this framework. Nobody forced her, but she chose to build her world on it, which means it's completely fair to ask whether it actually works. Quick accounting. Pride and lust get major focus. Wrath shows up through the exterminations. Greed is mostly hell of a boss territory. Gluttony, envy, and sloth are barely there. We'll come back to that. Power structure check, because this matters. The 7 deadly sins are the royalty of hell, born or appointed to rule the rings. Below them, the overlords: Valentino, Vox, Alastor. Powerful demons who earned their status through deals and dominance. Think inherited monarchy versus self-made billionaires. Keep that distinction in your head. It's going to come up a lot. Charlie's whole dream is that sinners can be redeemed. But redeemed from what, exactly? If the sins aren't treated as genuinely destructive forces the characters have to wrestle with, what is anyone being saved from? This video covers both seasons. These shows share a universe, and the sin framework spans both, so I'll draw from Hell of a Boss where the sin rulers appear. But the core argument is about whether Has-Been Hotel's own characters and structure hold up. And before anyone loads the "it's a comedy" defense, so is BoJack Horseman, and that show makes its protagonist Pride both hilarious and devastating in the same scene. Being funny doesn't exempt you from thematic coherence. VivziePop has described seasons 1 and 2 as their own complete arc. If the sin framework doesn't function as a narrative engine within the unit the creator herself defined as complete, that's a foundational issue, not a pacing choice. 5 failure modes. They escalate. Let's go. First up, Lucifer, the king of pride himself.
Charlie, dear, why don't you introduce me to your other friends?
The first failure mode is that sin in this show is inconsistent. It shows up in the performance and vanishes from the consequences. Pride isn't just arrogant. Pride is the sin that created hell. Lucifer didn't fall because of lust or greed. He fell because he looked at God and said, "I'm better." That is the weight this character is supposed to carry. And I'm not going to pretend the show gives us nothing. Lucifer does exhibit pride. Hell's greatest dad is competitive peacocking. His dismissal of Charlie's Hotel is wounded pride. When he interacts with characters he considers beneath him, you can see the arrogance in how he carries himself. That is pride. But it never costs him anything. When he competes with Alastor, it's comedy. When he rejects Charlie's dream, the show corrects it within the episode. The pride is right there in the performance, and the show just never follows through. Season 2 makes this even harder to ignore. Lucifer's powers are restricted in ways that leave him deeply vulnerable. He's cast into hell, surrounded by the creations he helped corrupt. Constrained by the terms of his own punishment, Vaggie discovers this when she asks him to act against Vox, and he admits he can't. Vox knows. He exploits it, and later, Vox captures Lucifer and uses him to power a weapon. The King of Pride, trapped by an overlord who considers him a battery. Not a threat, a battery. And the show plays it for laughs. You want to see pride done right? Azula in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Her pride makes her the most dangerous villain and the most tragic figure in the entire show. When her pride cracks, she doesn't just lose a fight, she loses her mind. That's pride as a character flaw. It fuels everything she does, and when it breaks, it takes her with it. Has-Been Hotel's King of Pride makes rubber ducks and gets drained by a guy with a TV for a face. And then there's the lore rewrite. The opening narration of the entire show strips Lucifer's fall of pride entirely. He wasn't arrogant. He was a dreamer, punished for creativity and compassion. That's not the Prince of Pride. That's a rejected art school applicant. They took the most iconic fall from grace story in all of Western mythology and turned it into misunderstood creative gets canceled. The show had the ingredients for one of the most compelling pride characters in animation, and it chose rubber ducks. Now, I know some of you are loading your counter argument, so let me address it here. The sin rulers don't need to personally embody their sin. They feed on others doing it. And yes, that's a reading supported by the lore. But feeding on sin while actively opposing it is something else entirely. Asmodeus, over in Hell of a Boss, feeds on lust, but promotes ethical, consensual desire. He's not just choosing not to embody lust, he's actively sanitizing the thing he's supposed to represent. A vampire who's vegan isn't, quote, not performing vampirism. They're denying their nature. And the stronger version of the argument? Ruling a sin is structural, not personal. A king doesn't need to be the most patriotic citizen. That falls apart the moment the show gives these rulers personal arcs. Lucifer has a depression story, a daughter, a rivalry with Alastor. Those are personal traits. None of them are pride. And if the sin rulers have evolved past their destructive sin, if the embodiments of these vices have personally outgrown them, then the show has already demonstrated that redemption is possible without Charlie's Hotel. She's not proposing something new. The rulers of sin are already doing the thing she's trying to prove is possible. So what exactly is the hotel proving? The second failure mode is that sin in this show is externalized. It keeps getting treated as something done to the characters instead of something they carry. And the character that makes this most obvious is Angel Dust. In the pilot, Angel Dust felt like the show's thesis statement. Here's a sinner. He sinned. A lot. He seems to enjoy it. Can someone like that be redeemed? Can a genuine sinner choose to be better? That's the question the pilot was asking. Season 1 reframes Angel Dust. And I want to be clear, Poison is devastating, beautiful, one of the best moments in the entire show, full stop. That song alone is worth the price of admission. But it reframes lust as something done to Angel Dust, something inflicted on him by Valentino, and that shifts the entire moral weight of his story. The show isn't blind to Angel Dust's agency. Loser Baby centers his own choices, his drinking, his recklessness. But notice what Loser Baby is actually about: coping, self-destruction, not desire. The show gives lust its emotional climax in Poison, a showstopper about what's done to him. And it gives his personal agency a comedic duet about drinking. The ratio tells you where the show's heart is, and the framework's own assignments make it worse. Valentino is lust as a deadly sin, selfish, exploitative. The show correctly treats him as a monster, but he's just an overlord. The actual Prince of Lust? Over in Hell of a Boss, Asmodeus has turned a deadly sin into a lifestyle brand. You could argue that's subversive. What if lust, expressed with care, isn't a sin at all? But neither show has actually engaged with that question. They just give the Prince of Lust a healthy relationship and move on. That's one of the most interesting theological questions either show could ask, and they're leaving it on the table. And here's where the framework doesn't just fail, it collapses. In Season 2, Vox weaponizes Angel Dust's past in a public broadcast. The show strongly implies that Angel killed his father, and then immediately complicates it. Vox asks if Angel's father hit him, the implication of abuse, the suggestion that the killing may have been self-defense or an act of protection, possibly of his twin sister Molly. The character who looks like lust, acts like lust, is designed head to toe as the embodiment of desire, and the show can't even clearly state what damned him. His visual design says lust, his narrative says trauma, his implied damnation, murder, and the show won't commit to whether the murder was a sin or an act of survival. The framework can't sort this character, and the show's own ambiguity proves it. Season 2 doubles down on the externalization. It's revealed that Vox had been using some form of mind control on Angel Dust, and the show implies this manipulation may have been going on longer than anyone realized. He's hypnotized into publicly denouncing the hotel and endorsing Vox's uprising against heaven. Under Vox's control, Angel nearly kills Cherry Bomb and Husk when they try to rescue him. By the end of Season 2, Angel leaves the hotel entirely. He can't trust himself after what he was made to do. He goes back to working with Valentino, despite his friends pleading with him to come home. Valentino stripped his agency in Season 1. Vox strips it again in Season 2. Different villain, same structure. The show keeps taking sin out of the sinner's hands. Angel Dust's story across 2 full seasons is about external forces controlling him, not about a man confronting his own moral failings. That's empathetic, that's well-intentioned, and it means the sin framework has nothing to say about him. Both of those stories are worth telling, but only one of them needs the 7 deadly sins to exist, and it's not the one the show is telling. The third failure mode is that sin in this show is unexamined. The family sin is right there, and nobody in the show can see it. Charlie wasn't sent to hell for sinning. She was born there. So the question isn't what's her sin? It's how does the daughter of pride relate to pride? The princess of hell, the offspring of the most important sin in the entire cosmology. And the show gives her no meaningful connection to it. But here's the thing, she does show pride. The show just calls it something else. Season 2 gives Charlie genuine flaws. She steamrolls people. She needs to be right. She can be controlling in her approach to redemption. It's her hotel, her dream, her rules. Vivzie Pop herself described her arc as learning to not let her desire to not be seen as the bad guy push everyone away. Listen to that phrasing. Desire to not be seen as the bad guy. That is pride. The need to be perceived as righteous, to never be wrong. That's textbook pride of conviction. But the show never names it. It calls it a communication issue. It frames her flaws as naivete or excessive optimism. The family sin is right there, and nobody sees it. And when you step back, and this is the thing that stopped me in my tracks, Charlie looks at God's system and says, "This is wrong, and I can do better." That is exactly what Lucifer did. Her dream, her beautiful, compassionate dream, is also an act of the sin that damned her father. She's the daughter of pride, and her defining characteristic is the certainty that she knows better than the system that rules the cosmos. A Charlie who had to confront that, who had to ask, am I saving the world, or am I just proving I'm right, would be one of the most compelling protagonists in animation. But the show treats her righteousness as self-evident. There's nothing to struggle against, because the show won't admit her virtue has a shadow. The fourth failure mode is that sin is unassigned. The framework is vestigial. It's there on the map, but it's doing no work in the story. Alastor, the most interesting character in Hazbin Hotel, and his entire arc operates outside the sin framework. His story across both seasons is defined by power, mystery, showmanship, and control. His Season 2 arc revolves around a soul contract that binds him to a more powerful entity, a deal he made for tremendous power in hell at the cost of his freedom. His entire plotline is about escaping that contract. In the finale, he does it through a chain of technicalities, engineering situations where the other parties violate their own terms. Fans have debated his sin for years. Pride? Wrath? Gluttony because he was a cannibal? The show never makes any of these narratively operative. His arc is about manipulating the fine print of a demon deal. He's operating in the genre of infernal contract law, while the show's framework promises theological drama. And then there are the characters who do engage with personal sin, and they're never the ones you'd expect. Vox's backstory is a 7 Deadly Sins greatest hits. A weatherman consumed by jealousy of the station's news anchor who murdered his way up, demanded control of the network, built a cult, and died when a TV fell on his head. Envy, wrath, greed, pride, all baked into one origin story, used to build Season 2's most effective villain, an overlord, not a sin ruler. The overlord does the sin work. The actual sin rulers don't. Even Husk, who comes closest to owning a genuine personal sin with his gambling and drinking, gets his arc hijacked by Alastor's soul contract. The show can access personal sin when it wants to. It just consistently redirects the story toward power and control. And then there are the gaps. Nifty lives in the Redemption Hotel. Nobody can tell you her sin. She's a murder-obsessed maid. Which deadly sin is that? Lilith, Queen of Hell, Lucifer's wife, Charlie's mother, has no defined relationship to any sin. Her absence might be intentional mystery, but a mystery isn't a function. Beelzebub, Gluttony, appears briefly in Season 2 at a party. No arc, no narrative weight, present without being operative. And of the remaining sins, Envy and Sloth have no meaningful character representation whatsoever. Charlie's phone contacts include Mammon, Leviathan, and Asmodeus, proving the show acknowledges these rulers exist, but gives them no narrative function. You can't build a house on 7 pillars and only have 3 doing any work. The fifth failure mode, the big one, is that sin in this show is inverted. The righteous commit the real sins. Adam, pride, lust, and not just crude humor. Lust is dominance, sexual entitlement wielded as power, wrath, gleeful, singing while he does it, genocide. All of that, and this man lived in paradise. Loot, wrath incarnate, personalized into vendetta. Sarah, pride and sloth, She knew the extermination was wrong and initially did nothing. And when Adam died in the season 1 finale, the character who embodied more deadly sins than almost anyone else in the show, he wasn't struck down in some grand reckoning of sin versus virtue. He was stabbed in the back by Nifty. The character whose sin the show has never defined took out the angel who committed the most sins. The sin framework can't even explain its own climax. Zoom out from Adam to the system he served. Heaven's solution to sin isn't redemption. It's annual genocide, wrath in the execution, sloth in the reasoning, killing sinners because redeeming them is harder, pride in the assumption that they're right to do it. And then there's Vaggie, former exorcist angel. She showed mercy to a sinner during an extermination. She was cast out for it. Her sin was compassion. Adam embodied pride, lust, and wrath and stayed in heaven until a maid stabbed him. That's not a moral framework. That's a loyalty test. Sin is just what heaven calls disobedience. Now, to be fair, season 2 shows that not all angels are monsters. Sarah expresses remorse for the exterminations. Emily puts herself at real risk trying to help contain the threat Vox poses, and her willingness to act inspires the overlords to join the fight. Abel finds the courage to stand against Lute, ordering her to return to heaven and stop her personal vendetta against Vaggie. These are real moments of individual growth. Heaven has people who are evolving, but the system that exiled Vaggie for mercy and tolerated Adam's sins hasn't been architecturally reformed. Individual decency doesn't fix systemic rot. Here's the test that makes all of this concrete. Name a musical number in this show where a character wrestles with a specific moral failing that defines them. Not where a sin shows up as set dressing, where the song is about the reckoning. Poison is about what lust does to angel dust, not about him wrestling with his own desire. More Than Anything is about parental love. Loser Baby is about self-destruction. Hell's Greatest Dad performs pride as comedy, competitive peacocking, but nobody in the song confronts what that pride costs them. Out for Love is about heartbreak and self-worth. The show's emotional center beats to the rhythm of trauma and love, not sin. The sins built the world. The songs tell a different story. And in a musical, the songs are the story. Now, Serpentius, the show's one successful redemption story, and the case that brings all 5 of these failures together. He sacrifices himself protecting the hotel, ascends to heaven. In season 2, he's confirmed as genuinely redeemed. I want to engage honestly with the counter reading. Pentheus's arc does follow a pride to humility shape. Pompous wannabe conqueror becomes selfless hero. If you've been trained on redemption stories, you'll read it that way instinctively. That reading is legitimate. But here's what we know about his backstory. According to creator commentary and background material, Pentheus was a London inventor in 1888 who witnessed a Jack the Ripper murder and did nothing. He carried the guilt of that inaction until he died, and his soul ended up in hell. His sin wasn't pride or wrath or any of the obvious ones. It was inaction. He saw a murder and did nothing. And here's the thing that broke my brain. Inaction, moral apathy, failure to act when righteousness demands it, that is one of the 7 deadly sins. It's sloth, not laziness. Acedia, the theological version of sloth, is specifically about spiritual and moral indifference. Witnessing a murder and doing nothing is a textbook case. So the framework does cover Serpentius. His sin slots cleanly into one of the 7 categories, and the show still doesn't use it. His redemption arc never frames his flaw as sloth. He never wrestles with apathy or indifference as a character trait. When heaven welcomes him, nobody names his sin. His atonement gets acknowledged generically. No deadly sin identified. No specific moral failing connected to his sacrifice. And there's an extra layer. This backstory comes from creator materials, not from the show itself. The creators know what his sin is, they mapped it to a specific event, and the show still doesn't use it. Their own understanding of this character isn't making it into the narrative. That's somehow worse than if the framework couldn't sort him. It can, the show just chooses not to. Even in the one case where everything lines up, the story ignores its own cosmological scaffolding. 5 failure modes, 1 pattern. Sin rulers exhibit sin with 0 consequences. Inconsistent. Sinners' sins get displaced onto abusers, or the show won't commit to what they did. Externalized. The protagonist has pride, and the show won't call it that. Unexamined. The most interesting characters operate completely outside the framework, and huge chunks of the framework don't exist at all. Unassigned. Angels commit more sins than demons and face less punishment. Inverted. What does this add up to? The show's own universe doesn't treat sin as a real moral category. Sinner just means someone heaven decided to punish. And here's the paradox. Charlie isn't actually trying to redeem sinners. She's trying to overturn an unjust system. That is a great story. Trauma survivors finding each other, building family, fighting a system that was rigged against them before they arrived. That's genuinely compelling. But the 7 deadly sins are inherited scaffolding from a show the creators thought they were making. The show they actually made outgrew it. Now here's the strongest counter-argument, and I want to give it its full weight. Maybe the broken framework is intentional. Maybe Vivziepop is deliberately deconstructing the concept of sin itself. She said the show comes from the religious trauma of her lived life as a child, and that she adores adaptations of any kind, especially of a pre-existing mythos. This is her take on the mythology, not a faithful reproduction. The sympathetic demons, the monstrous angels, the irrelevant sins. What if those are the thesis? The Good Place had the same insight. The afterlife sorting system is broken, and it committed. Season 1, discover the system is rigged. Season 2, rebel. Season 3, build a replacement. Season 4, implement it. The show didn't just reveal the problem, it followed through. Hazbin Hotel's characters demonstrate that sin is a meaningless label. Its world still organizes everything around sin. Charlie still operates as if sin is real, as if people committed specific moral failings that can be named and overcome. Her own show has spent 2 seasons proving otherwise. Whether that gap is intentional or accidental, it hasn't been made textual yet. The show might be building toward a deconstructive thesis, but within the arc the creator called complete, we'll get there isn't enough. The script and the setting are disagreeing with each other, and neither side knows it. I think the show is heading toward one of the most radical theological arguments in modern animation without realizing it. That sin is a political tool. That sinner is a status imposed by power, not a condition earned by behavior. If the show ever leans into that consciously, that could be incredible. But to make that argument, the show would need to change Charlie's mission. She'd have to stop trying to redeem sinners and start trying to abolish the concept of sin itself. Not, these people can be forgiven. These people were never guilty. That's a different show. Maybe it's the show Hazbin Hotel is becoming. It's not the show it's told us it is. Not yet. I don't want to just point at problems. The raw materials are already there. Lucifer. What if his goofiness was a mask? What if his depression wasn't generic sadness, but specifically wounded pride? The humiliation of a being who believed he was above God and got proven catastrophically wrong. What if his love for Charlie was real, but his pride made it conditional? If my daughter redeemed sinners, then I was right all along. Not because he's a bad father, because his fatherhood and his pride are the same impulse, and he can't tell the difference. Tell me that isn't more interesting than rubber ducks. Angel dust. What if the show kept the trauma arc and the murder backstory and gave him one moment where, free from both Valentino and Vox, he still made a choice that was selfish and harmful, and had to recognize that impulse as his. Not Val's abuse, not Vox's hypnosis, his. What if redemption meant learning to own your worst act without someone else to blame it on? That makes his goodness a choice, not just the absence of a villain. Charlie. What if the show named her certainty as pride? Your dream, Charlie. Your beautiful dream. It's also an act of the sin that damned your father. You're looking at God's system and saying, I know better, just like he did. What if she had to earn her virtue by confronting the darkness she inherited? That's the emotional engine for the entire show's thesis about whether anyone can change. Heaven. What if the angels had a real case? Not a good one, but a real one. So Charlie's crusade required more than just being right. If every character had a real, functional relationship with a specific sin, one they struggled with, one they sometimes lost to, the show wouldn't just be asking, can sinners go to heaven? It would be asking, can sinners stop sinning? That's a harder question. We all know what it's like to have a part of ourselves we can't stop feeding, a pride we can't swallow, a desire that won't stay buried. The 7 deadly sins endure because they describe something real about us. A show set in hell should understand that better than anyone. Hazbin Hotel has incredible music, gorgeous animation, and characters I genuinely care about. Poison alone is worth the entire show, and every one of those musical numbers tells the truth about what this show really is. It's about trauma and love, and fighting for people who've been told they're not worth saving. That is a beautiful story. I just wish the framework it was built on was as powerful as the story itself. Maybe season 3 will change that. I hope so. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. I'll see you next time.